I gave him my introduction. Short, bald, bespectacled, ugly, old, and lame, the dinosaur. That's all he needed to say. Oh, God, right. Anyway, it is a real privilege and a pleasure to be with you today, first of all in this lovely area, but also with such a wonderful group. I'm completely bowled over by the whole thing, I can tell you. How do I make this damn slides go forward? If it's got more than one, I tell you what, I'll say slide and you just do it. That's much better. Right. I did not say slide. Go back. Thank you. So, do first responders have importance? Slide. Of course they do. You know it, and I know it. This isn't working, is it? Right. Shall I try and teach me how to do the damn thing? That. Just bring it towards you. Just bring it back towards you. That towards me. God, these complications. Right. I've decided that I can't tell you anything you don't already know. It's good to share views, but I've completely changed my mind about why I'm here. Why I'm here is not to tell you anything. You already know it. I will try and convince you that I know a little bit of it, so that you'll allow me to join you, so that together we can convince the world. The purpose of first responders, I know that. That's not bad, is it? The purpose of first responders, of course, is most importantly the treatment of unexpected cardiac arrest. And of the unexpected adult cardiac arrests, anyway, up to 80% or even more are likely to be cardiac. Then, of course, it's good if you can also cope with other life-threatening, certainly medical emergencies. And a thing that is really important, I think, is to be there to offer support to the afflicted, if necessary, or certainly to their relatives. That is a very important thing, because these are always very traumatic occasions in the psychological sense. Also, to aid access to the medical services, you know the area, the emergency services often don't. So it is often important, even if it's only opening doors, putting lights on and what have you. And then, of course, there are other specific local duties of which training others might be important. So there we are. I think, know what you're doing. Now, I do have a special interest, because it was in 1987, I will claim, it was in 1987 that we introduced the very first community responder service anywhere in the world. I'm a little bit used to finding out the things I claim to have done first. I find they've been done first in Ireland. So no doubt we'll be hearing from several of you later. But apart from Ireland, anyway, we were the first in the world. And we taught members of the transport police, the police who worked on railway stations and airports in Brighton, where I live, and Victoria in London, where I went to frequently, because I worked at a hospital there as well as in Brighton. And so I thought, if I got a defibrillator either end, it gives me some chance. So we trained them, and it was very interesting that in 18 months, 21 collapses, of 20 at Victoria, just one in Brighton, and 5 people were discharged from hospital alive. That wasn't bad, was it, for the first scheme? 25% success rate. Now, if somebody cares to ask me why this wasn't published until 2014, I'm very happy to tell you it'll take about an hour and a half, so it might be better to be done at some separate time. But it did lead indirectly, it did lead by a very interesting chain of events to the setting up of the first Department of Health program in the United Kingdom, the National Defibrillator Program, where we had, in our first report that we wrote, our first report, by that time, 177 witness arrests over 31 months, 14 people discharged from hospital alive. Again, you see, that's about 25%, mostly from airports and railway stations. But it was pretty good. The Department of Health, just after that, even laid on a party in London for the survivors. It was great fun. Anyway, that scheme, eventually we had some 3,000 defibrillators before the scheme was finally taken over by the ambulance service. So there we are. That was why I have this special, oh my God, interest. But by then, by 2000, lots of other things were happening. The American Airlines, 14 cases, 29% discharged. And we've heard already, if you want to really enjoy a cardiac arrest, go to Las Vegas, because they are so good at it. I'm quoting here 53% discharged. They've got better, we heard earlier, 70% discharged. So a great place to go for a cardiac arrest. The thing about Chicago Airport is that several of those people were resuscitated by passers-by who had never seen an AED before, but they were, for some reason, aware that they put it out of the box and it talked to them. So really, there we are. You can actually resuscitate, never mind 4 or 5%, 25%, 50%, any number you want. It's all easy. Well, these have been rather special cases, because what I've shown you so far are areas where there's lots of anxiety for people rushing around, under great stress, carrying luggage very often, and the adrenaline runs high. And if the adrenaline runs high, even people with healthier hearts are much more likely to have a cardiac arrest. And then if this is in places like the airports and stations where there are people right there, less delay, you are bound to have more success. But, okay, but that does mark, doesn't it? That does mark a priority for community first responders. Be in these places with active populations, places of stress, places of exertion. Are you well covered in your big railway stations? I don't know that. Probably you are. But responders close by. And this is where you really will do extremely well. But, of course, I know, and you know, that most are not in places like this. Most unexpected arrests don't fit into this, what I would say, ideal. We've already heard a little bit about where cardiac arrests do occur, the independent ones. And I'm going to show you data from a study in the UK done in 3 UK cities, York and Brighton and Cardiff. And here in this study, a population of about 1 million people, we're looking at the ratio between cardiac arrests in hospital and out of hospital. And you'll see that nearly 3% of the unexpected, talk about unexpected cardiac arrests, occur out of hospital. Fine. It's also pretty interesting that the ratio is over 15 for the people under the age of 50. Now, that's about 5 times the average. There are fewer in the group, but that more than compensates for it, the fact that they're so frequent. The point I'm trying to make, maybe a bit clumsily, is that people getting unexpected cardiac arrest out there very often are in that younger age group. They're not all doddery old dinosaurs like I am. So there we are. It is worth going for. About 20%, we've heard already, occur in public places, because the out-of-hospital ones occurring in home are more difficult. But of all this number, you've got that 20% in public places. That is what we're trying to cover. But be aware that the situation changes by the minute. Going to come back to that in a second, by what I mean by the minute, but let me just remind you, first of all, of a description of the phases of cardiac arrest that have been published in the States. I'm sorry, these slides of formatting has gone a wee bit wrong, never mind. First of all, we have what is described as the electrical phase. The electrical phase where you have got something that could be dealt with by a shock. The first phase, in most cases, may be lasting 4 or 5 minutes. Then 5 to 10 minutes, the hemodynamic phase, when you've got to do something to actually improve the blood flow yourself, you've got to give CPR. And then, oh dear, look at those rather sad faces. We come to the metabolic phase, they say, where you need not only CPR, but maybe drugs as well. Drugs? Can anybody tell me any drug that has ever been shown to improve cardiac arrest? I'll let you into a secret. I've got tattooed on my chest, no adrenaline except for anaphylaxis, because like all the other drugs, it isn't any bloody good. They said I could swear. And then there's the phase of irreversibility, that after 20 minutes, where what you should do then is go and smoke a cigarette and drink a good glass of that wonderful stuff they brew down the road there, which I think they call dew. I'm waiting to get some of it later. Now, be aware, we've been heard twice today what everybody says, that with every minute that passes, the chances of success go down by about 10%. Okay, I'll challenge you. Go and look at the reference when you see it next, and it'll refer you back to another reference. And go to that, and it'll refer you back further. And go to that, and it'll refer you further back. I've done this. It took me ages, and I finally got back to where the data came from. And it's bloody computer modeling. It isn't real data at all. If you look at real data, and the best real data, I think, comes from Canada. This comes from the OPALS study. It actually works out at over 20% per minute. So that really makes it even more important than that figure of 10% that is actually computer-based. It's not real. So 22% per minute, it really is so important that we have ways of getting there with help on time. What's going on? Well, you know what's going on, but I'll tell you again what's going on, if only to show you that I know what's going on. There is ventricular fibrillation when the heart is working hard. It's working harder than your hearts are working now, but it's wasting its energy because when one bit's pulling, the other bit's pushing, and so on, and it's not actually doing anything useful. Then there's asystole or severe bradycardia, where the heart effectively is not pumping at all. And there's that other nuisance one of pulseless electrical activity, when the electrocardiogram shows activity, but it ain't giving a pulse and may not be giving any heartbeat at all. Of course, you know that it is the electrical that's best. It is a ventricular fibrillation that's a treatable one. I've got my little sad men there again. Look, asystole or severe bradycardia, pulseless electrical activity, should have 2 unhappy faces there. That's really, really bad. No, it is the electrical is best that we, of course, are interested in. There we are, ventricular fibrillation. A patient is dead. You give a shock, and then the patient is alive again. You feel better, and with luck, your patient will feel better as well. And that's all wonderful. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Whereas, about 80%, we think, of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests are believed to start in a shockable rhythm. In some of our data where we had download analyses, I showed you the data from earlier, it was well over 80%. But in general, maybe about 80% at the very beginning. But if untreated, nearly all of these become unshockable within a very few minutes. If you're doing downloads, you can often see this happening, ventricular fibrillation disappearing, becoming asystole. And not more than 1 or 2% can be resuscitated even in expert hands. Time is of the essence, and the treatment is primarily electrical. So there we are, the time of arrest in ventricular fibrillation. At the time of arrest, about 80% shockable. By the time the ambulance gets there, we're down to 20 or 30%. And that is a great shame, but that is the fact. Okay, with a community first responder, we want to get that arrow up. We're not going to get it usually to the 80%. You can if you're in airports and you're in places like that and you'll be on the spot, but usually you can't. But you can do a lot better than the ambulances are able to do. And so, sorry about this damn formatting. You told me, Simon, you're going to get this fixed. It's his fault, right. I told you already, the electrical phase and 4 or 5 minutes of shock. Certainly you want to be there in the hemodynamic phase, 5 to 10 minutes, not later than that. And remember, won't you, that every minute costs on average 22% of life saved. I've told you that, fine. But all this does mean that we really have a problem, because collapse to call averages more than 2 minutes. A call to get an ambulance out, in London anyway, about 2 minutes. And dispatch to arrival, many minutes. It's going to be, at best, 8 or 9 or 10, and it may be much longer. And action needs to be taken within 8 minutes of the first call for help if it have any real chance, ideally within 4 or 5. Rarely possible for the ambulance service. And so we have one of Chamberlain's laws. I've got about 8,000 of them, but this is one of them, that we can say with conviction that out-of-hospital cardiac arrest is not primarily, did you like that? I used my stick, is not primarily an ambulance problem. It is a community problem. But of course, it is still an ambulance service problem. It is good liaison with the ambulance service, but it can't effectively be for ambulances. That's why, of course, we need dedicated volunteers within the community who will act with the ambulance service to offer the rapid response. And the only thing is, and I'm impressed by what I've heard here, I've been very impressed. The ambulance service must learn to use them to best effect. And I think you are achieving that in Ireland very much better than we're actually managing to achieve it in most parts of England. So that is one of the many things I've been impressed by hearing that, learning to use them to best effect. What we need for success is ideally a 4 to 5 minute response, certainly less than 8 minutes. Okay, we dealt with that. A rapid call taker recognition of a likely cardiac arrest. We haven't heard much conversation about that today, but for call takers to recognize a cardiac, it isn't always easy. They don't get it right all the time. And one of the things that has confused people is agonal breathing. Is the patient breathing? Yes, but agonal breathing. If you don't know what agonal breathing is about or like, then I can give you a good demonstration afterwards. With any luck, without dropping dead. And activation of CFRs within 30 seconds of the ambulance being activated. Reliable communication means for liaison that Ken was talking about. And of course, ideally, a 24-hour cover, but any cover of CFRs is better than none. And full opportunity for training opportunities. We heard a bit about your training here, which is obviously very comprehensive, and Ken described the training in England. That is really a bit of an undertaking and can limit numbers. But of all these things, the one that I particularly like to emphasize, because it's the one most easily put right, is that activation within 30 seconds of the ambulance. I want to ask a favor. I want to own this, so I want you to allow me to call it Chamberlain's rule. I've got plenty of those too, but one more doesn't do any harm. That activation within 30 seconds of the ambulance, please. That is one of the things that we can and should be doing. And it sounds to me as though you're more likely to be doing it here than we are in the UK. Now, I've got a personal view about the training needed for CFRs. Cardiac arrest is the most pressing emergency, and this requires only basic training in CPR and confidence in using an AED. Will you note, I did not say training in AED. An AED does not require any training. I would ask you never to use the term training for an AED. You pick the bloody thing off the wall and it talks to you, and do what it says, and that's all you need. In that first the transport police ones that I told you about, we did actually give them 30 minutes of building confidence, but that's all they had, 30 minutes, and they had 25% successes. So anyway, it requires only basic training in CPR and confidence using an AED device. So if we haven't got enough, and I'm thinking more of England perhaps than I am of Ireland, enough CFR cover, then can't we have a system where we start with basic training, just give people what they need, teach them to do CPR well, and confidence in using an AED, and that's a basic level. That's my view anyway. And then for those who are keen and competent and can devote adequate time, they can have higher grades of training and a wider range of applicable skills for responses. I mean, you've got that to a degree here, but that very basic one, why don't we use that? Why don't we use it in England, Ken? Why don't we, because we certainly need to be able to have a 24-hour cover. But, for all skill levels, 4 to 5 minutes if we can. Impossible? Maybe. But I do want to not quite end, but nearly end on one other thing by just telling you the time isn't always what it seems. The time of collapse and the time of ventricular fibrillation may not always be the same. There was an interesting paper, which I've referenced here, where they put together all the cases they could find where people had had a cardiac arrest wearing a Holter monitor. So they actually had the data of what rhythm happened when they collapsed. Now, of those collapses that were cardiac arrests when people arrived, of those, 62% started with a ventricular tachycardia, in most cases, looking at the ECG, likely to be capable of giving at least a cardiac output, possibly as good as CPR could give. And so this explains some of the late successes. Now, don't imagine that all cardiac arrests start this way, or that 60% of them do, because this was a selected group who were wearing Holter monitors. Why? Because they were having some sort of attacks, maybe. They weren't the general population. But this happens. A lot of cardiac arrests start with a rhythm that it won't allow you to stand on your feet and be conscious, but is providing a little bit of blood flow to keep the brain, at least to aid it. And that does explain some of the late successes that we see. Now, I also, of course, want to say what's perfectly obvious to show you that I know. It's not only CFRs we want good bystander CPR. I hope you don't. I rather like that demonstration we had with that nice little tune. It was really very good. And one of the nice things was you didn't stop. I hope you'd never try to teach the general public to give ventilations, do you? Reassure me you don't. Because teaching the general public, 5 minutes left, I don't require 5 minutes. Where was I when I was so rudely interrupted? Good bystander CPR can buy time. I've completely forgotten now. So we must ensure the public are taught. And CFRs can help with that and can help with the motivation. These are a bit of interesting data. It comes from Gothenburg. And we're looking here at the time from collapse to the time that of the arrival and what happened. In the blue, we see the survivors there in the blue columns according to time, if no CPR was given before the emergency services arrived. The red, on the other hand, is what happened to survival if there were people around giving CPR. Often not good CPR, but as Leonard Cobb in Seattle always said, any CPR is much better than no CPR. And the data usually shows that the results, the survival is doubled twice or 2.5 times, as indeed here. So that's what and then you've got out there 15 to 60 minutes, 19 to 20 minutes. Goodness me, what's all that about? Well, it is because some of these people, when they collapsed, did not actually have a cardiac arrest. So that longer time can be explained. Okay, and with your public training, then those later results are going to be better, like we've got for the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 minutes. And of course, if you have people who can use defibrillators, you're going to get those results up much better. So yeah, we should be looking towards the 40% and the 50% and go to Las Vegas sort of figures. That is really what we need to aim for. So that is great. What we should aim for always is to have both, because having both will improve survival for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest more than any other measure. And I just want to say, to wrap up, that I know it, you know it. Let's together convince the world and spread our enthusiasm to all. Thank you for being what you are. I think I was going to say something else, but I know when I'm told to stop.